Hello and welcome back to a new video where we're going to be discussing Jed Mckenna. Two of his books. The first one is called Spiritual Enlightenment, The Damndest Thing. And first off, if you've never heard of Jed Mckenna, it's probably, when I read the first book, it was probably the most impactful book I've ever read in my entire life. And I'd say still one of the most impactful books. And if you do know Jed, one of the reasons I want to make this video is because there's so little information on Jed Mckenna, and for good reason, which I'll explain more for those of you that have never heard of Jed Mckenna. So when I first got this book, I was at a time where, I had gone through a really deep depression, and kind of this self-process just sort of happened where I was very depressed, and I was going through a breakup. I moved to New York City, and I kind of got to this place where life was empty and meaningless, and just there was no point to living, and I just didn't really want to be here anymore. And that sort of led me to discovering more my spiritual side just by chance. I got into Buddhism, and it definitely created an impact. But when I started going to like Buddhist meetups and meditations and talking to other spiritual people, I got very turned off very quickly. And one day, someone that I knew, my neighbor, a friend of my neighbor's, was sitting in their apartment, and he was reading this book called Spiritual Enlightenment, The Damndest Thing. And I was like, what is that? And he's like, oh, it's about this guy who lives kind of in this like community ashram style house, and he's just enlightened. He talks about enlightenment and how like enlightenment is for anyone. It's not like what you think it is. And he just like plays video games and skydives, and I was like, what? So it was at the time it was like the first iPhone had just come out. So there's a book app, and I bought the book on my phone, just like right there. I read the book, not literally nonstop, but in less than a day. It was just like, and I was so blown away. I was like, oh my God, this book's amazing. I need to find out who this person is. I need to read this book again. So I opened the app back up, and I went to the first page to read it again. And the strangest thing happened. The book just disappeared. And I don't mean like the app of the book. I mean like all the pages were blank. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, that's a fluke. I was broke at the time. I deleted it, and I bought it again for like $10. I was like, screw it. And even that at the time, that was a lot of money. And it was just disappeared. All the pages were gone. And then I was like, well, that's strange. So I went to look Jed Mckenna up online, and there was no Jed Mckenna. And I was like, what the hell is going on? So as it turned out, Jed Mckenna was there. There is no Jed. Jed's a ghostwriter. Whoever wrote the books, no one knows. And I've done some digging, and I've found some things and potentials and stuff, and people have their theories and whatnot. But the beauty of this is that unlike most books where people write and they're like, this is my belief, or this is my thought, and I'm the spiritual teacher, and this is what I know, and you can learn about it and learn about me and come to my events and all these things. The beauty about Jed Mckenna is that there is no Jed Mckenna. So like you can't find this person. You can't question them. You can't look into their life. You can't go to their workshops and retreats and stuff. And what made that so interesting to me is that the whole concept of the book is about spiritual enlightenment not being what we think it is, and really like living. It's more about non-dualism and living in this state of just awareness and understanding of what is, by going through this process of destroying everything that is not. So if you've seen my videos, I talk about this a lot, about the no self. And my first book that I wrote was literally called A Conversation with Your Best Friend, a no self-help book about the things our parents didn't teach us. And it was kind of a joke and a bit of to Jed, but what I, kind of uncovered in this whole process that has been amazing is that this person wrote this book, and there is no Jed, so you can't question them. You can't, make it about an external thing. You always have to point the finger back to yourself. And something about that, more so than any other book that I've read, created an impact, because it's easy to get caught up in the teacher. Even with Buddhism, it's easy to be like, oh, there's the Buddha. That's what the Buddha looks like. This is what the Buddha eats. This is what the Buddha wears. If I just like kind of mimic this, sort of godlike figure, well, then maybe one day I'll reach, this level of excitement and enlightenment. But with Jed, it's like, no, there is no me. I don't exist. I'm not real. Anything that you think about me is just you distracting yourself, taking yourself away from what is true. And so I debated when I was writing my books about making them, ghostwriter and stuff. But I figured since I already had a lot of content and things online, it would be easy to figure out who it was. So I took the concept and I really try to hammer that into my books of reminding people that there is no me. So here's the interesting part. Yes, I exist, and you can look me up and my name and everything, but there is no me. Just like in my recent video about no self, no problem. whoever you think that I am, whatever beliefs you have about where I live, what I do, how much money I made, my success, all that is just superficial distractions taking you away from the journey of discovering who you are beyond the false self. So when you go on this journey, you start to uncover things more and more and more. So the reason I titled this video, What Jed Mckenna Got Wrong, is kind of a joke. And, one of the things, so I would say it took me about 10 years, reading the books for 10 years, I gave them to everybody that I know. I would just be like, Jed, and I was like freaking a Jed cult for a minute. Even though I knew there was no Jed, I just was like, this is the most powerful book you'll ever read, just read it. And some people went into their Jed hole. Other people thought that it was just crap and that Jed was egotistical and all these things. And it's common. People say that, he's very self-absorbed, or, he's kind of an a-hole in the way he talks about things, because he's very blunt and he's very direct. But again, you're missing the point. There is no, even though I'm talking about Jed, there is no Jed. So when people make it about Jed, they're missing the whole point of the books. But one of the biggest criticisms that I hear from this Jed perspective is that when people read it, they take on his ideas a bit too much. And it can be easy to kind of be like nihilistic, or nothing matters, nothing means anything. And that can be very depressing. Now, I don't think that's actually the concept and the point of the books, but I think it's easy to, like, nihilism in a weird way is a good place to start when you're going through this process, to kind of have this like, well, nothing matters, nothing means anything. But that's just kind of the beginning of it all. Rather, what Jed is actually saying is that, all that matters is destroying what is false. All the beliefs and ideas and conditions and lies we've been taught. The process of spiritual enlightenment is to recognize that that's all made up, and that we go through this process of destroying and burning that all to the ground, so that something else can be through this true, you can call it essence, or just like truth, unrealized, whatever you want to call it, whatever word you want to use. When you go through this process, you come to this place where you're not beheld to beliefs. We might still take on characters and egos as a way to slip into a costume to kind of communicate with the world, but there's no attachment to, oh, this is me. So I don't think Jed got anything wrong. I think these books are the perfect book for somebody getting into this process that wants to see a different perspective, because a lot of the people that he talks about, in his story, they're very conversational. So it's like him living his life, and then he'll meet somebody, or somebody will come to his place, and they're maybe someone who's been like a Buddhist for 20 years, and they've been studying under this great master, and they're still struggling. And he's like, how come it's taken you 20 years and you're still not any further on this journey? Maybe you've gotten more satsangs and you've learned more and you've read more scripture and you know the Sanskrit, but like, what does that stuff actually matter? You haven't actually taken the first step. So you get to see these different types of characters. Some people who are like the uber spiritual people that know all the things and can tell you about all the stuff, and then other people that are just kind of new on the journey, but as he would say, are like further along than a lot of these people that got caught up in the spiritual trap and kind of bypass the actual process. Because what happens is, I think at some point it's inevitable that when we go on this journey towards self-discovery, it's not something we're trying to do. It's not something that, at least for me, like I wasn't like, oh, I want to be a spiritual person. This looks cool. Like one day my life just fell apart and I had to figure out what the hell was going on. And that process led me to, I did this before I heard about Jed, but when I read Jed, I was like, everything this person's saying, I felt like a future me wrote this book and gave it to me to like help me understand what's going on. It was very strange. But what Jed talks about is this process called spiritual autolysis. And spiritual autolysis is a process of just purging everything that you believe to be true. It's a simple writing practice to discover what's true. And I don't mean like, oh, 1 + 1 is 2. I'm talking about like, actually, what do you know for certain is true? And you do this writing process and you keep going deeper and deeper and deeper and keep going back and forth until you come to whatever realization you come to. And what that does is it helps you go through all your beliefs. You write down your beliefs and you analyze them and you look at them and you use the pen as a flaming sword to get to something that actually is true. And that process, when I ended there, that I ended up feeling very depressed because I felt like no belief was true, nothing mattered. And that's why I say like, nihilism is a good start, because it is a place to get to realize like, oh. So this brings me to maybe what Jed got wrong. And I think if anything, Jed does create a character where He has no friends, he has no family, no relationship that really means anything. He's just kind of floating around, living his life, hanging out with his dog, doing the things he does, and then occasionally rubbing up against some people and teaching them and kind of guiding them along the path. So I think a lot of people, even though we know Jed is made up, it's still easy to look at his life kind of like the Buddha thing, even though there is no actual Jed, and kind of get caught up in like, well, I don't want to be like that person. And spiritual enlightenment seems very lonely and very sad, and you can't have relationships. And even though I don't think that was Jed's intention, what I've seen over time is that's once you've gone through this process, you can do whatever you want to do. You can experience whatever you want to experience. You can express and learn and uncover. And it's just that you have this deeper understanding that it's all made up. And that's the beauty of it. So you can be in relationships. You can have friendships. I've given this book to so many people, and whether they resonate with it or not, it's almost kind of irrelevant. But like, there's a certain language that I've developed with certain friends because we've all gone through this process. And I think when Jed talks about in these books, he says, very few people actually are enlightened and very few people understand this. I think because these books were written, over 20 whatever years ago, this is the third book in the trilogy, Spiritual Warfare, what a great name. I think at the time, because he hadn't written these books, it probably felt much more lonely. But I think now more people understand it and now more people get it. And so it's easier to actually communicate. It's easier to form friendships. And even if a friendship is a facade, if it's a made-up concept, it doesn't matter. That's the beauty of it. So I think people get worried about going on this path towards enlightenment, and they think about this big thing, and I see the guru, and I want to just have more peace and joy in my life. I'll never get to where they got to. But that's all the illusion. When you see somebody outside of yourself, they say when you see the Buddha on the road cut his head off, it's like when you see the great guru and they're elevated and they're beyond. To me, that's all just, it's a facade. It's all made up. It's all very superficial. Yes, somebody can take time to become very peaceful, and they can grow out their beard and they can smile, and it's a character, right? You can learn meditation. You can say, I spend 10 hours a day meditating. Somebody might look at that and be like, wow, I'd love to get there someday. I'd love to be as peaceful as you, and I'll probably never get there, but if I can just get in a little ounce of what you have, that will be good enough. And it's like, spirituality it's a pit stop. It's not a destination. There's another really interesting point. It's not something that Jed said per se, but it was a good reminder. And when you're along this journey, when you start to awaken to truth and you realize that the life that you're living is not actually what you thought it was, well, it's easy to start to grasp onto other things. And maybe you're like, oh my God, yoga. Okay. We got all these people and they're beautiful and they're on their mats and they look peaceful and they do some toning and whatever, meditating, and I just want to grab that. Or like, oh, people are doing breath work or they're doing quantum healing. And it's like all those things are cool things that you can tap into and have a relationship with. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them, but to assume that those are more spiritual than other things, that by doing yoga or breath work or whatever is somehow more spiritual than just existing and just looking at the mountain, I'll give you a little, right? It's not. That's all the illusion, and that is exactly the stuff that I'm talking about. So if you find yourself getting caught in these ideas as what is and what isn't spiritual, it's just creating more dualism. So I haven't really explained what I mean by dualism. So as maybe like someone like Jed would say, when you're living kind of from the false perspective, life is dualistic. It's good and bad. It's right and wrong. It's black and white. It's these kind of contrasting, polarizing Republican, Democrat. But in truth, that's all made up from human. We create these words and symbols and we try to bring them together and we create this false perspective. Now, it doesn't mean it might not be helpful to us in certain ways, and there's beautiful things that have been created from that perspective, but it also, in a sense, it doesn't matter. Because when you're living in this dualistic state, you're always going to be having to choose a side. But as Jed says, rather non-dualistic, non-dualism is the understanding that it is all one. It is all connected. It's all a piece of everything. The illusion is that there are different sides and perspectives. And you see this a lot in our world where we have, Democrats and Republicans and the liberals and the conservatives. And it's like things get more and more polarizing. And I started to see that, one side, the more this side gets more intense, the more this side has to. It's like each side creates itself. So they are connected, but the illusion is that they're separate and they have different beliefs and that means something. And I need to fight for my beliefs. And the more they fight, it just gets further and further away. We're seeing this time of just greater and greater and greater contrast and greater divide. And that's because people are living from this false perspective. So I think to kind of go back to, what Jed got wrong, it's first of nothing. I think the books are perfect. I think they're the most direct and forward way for anyone that's on this process already to make more sense of it. If you give this book to somebody, any of his books, if you're like, Spiritual and Collective Enlightenment, and first off, if you're going to read his books, I would start with the first one, which is Spiritual Enlightenment, the Damndest Thing. But if you give any of these books to someone and they're not already on the path in some way, they're probably going to reject it and they're going to say this guy's an ass and he's arrogant and all the things that you hear. But if you are someone or know someone who is already woken up and is confused and lost and trying to make sense of it, well, then these books are the perfect reminder of no, you're in this process and here's how to continue this process. Because I think what happens in life is there are people that see spiritual people and it seems like this cool thing. It's like, oh my God, Burning Man looks so cool. I got to go to there. And those people are peaceful and they're meditating and I want to do more of that. And that's one piece. But I think for most people that are going to relate to this book, what's going to happen is you're not going to be looking for spirituality. You're just going to be in your life and maybe the veil is going to crack at some point. You're going to realize something isn't quite right here. And you're going to start to feel disconnected from your reality. And you're going to start to see everybody as characters in a movie and you're going to have trouble relating. And when you're in that place, or if you know someone that's in that place, I think then these books are the aha. I mean, the amount of people that I've given to, when I first started giving out these books, it was just giving it to anybody. And then I got more artful and more understanding and realized that the people that are going to get this, they're going to know what I'm talking about. They're going to understand, I do feel like I'm in that space and I am lost and confused. And, I think it's wrong and I should be happy. And they have all these ideas. And it's actually, no, what's happening is you're going through this process of self-destruction. You're destroying the false self. And it might not make sense, but these books can be very helpful. It's the same reason that I write books, to help people along that process. So if there's anything that maybe Jed got, again, quote unquote, wrong, to me, it's just this, not realizing how impactful the books could have been and getting to this place of people are actually starting to get this. And from there, I think we can create a life that doesn't have to be as lonely. Now, again, it doesn't matter if you read these books or not and you feel alone and you want to live in a cave and do your thing, cool. However, I do think that there is this place that people can come together, and I'm living this life. I want to have a family and I'm in a relationship and I love my partner and we love creating that together. She's read the Jed books and we have that language. And so this is, I guess, I didn't even really know where this was going, and I never really do, but I think the point I'm trying to make is you can still be in relationship and you can find love and create family and community and all these things. And from that place, because you've had these understandings and you see non-dualism for what it is, you can actually create a place that makes more sense. I see a lot of people trying to create community and they're I just want to get land and live with people, and beautiful. And a lot of people out there are trying. I've been to many communities, but what I often see the problem is because everybody's coming from this place of ego, it often just falls apart. However, if you have this base foundation of understanding what the no self is and you create friends and community around that, well, it just makes it so much easier, because even if somebody has a belief, we all know that that's just their belief. It doesn't mean it has to be true. So I have friends and my partner and other people that I know that understand this base of reality, and it just makes it so much easier to create connection. So I think that was maybe something that Jed didn't anticipate. And again, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, the thing I realized about the Jed books is that they were his autolysis process. They were a process of just cleaning out the idea. Writing is releasing. When I write a book, I'm not saying this is what I believe and this is what you should believe. It's I'm just purging the ideas and the thoughts and the stories and things in my brain. And if somebody relates to that, great. So that's what I think Jed's books ultimately were. Even if you're reading Jed as like, oh, he's the teacher and he's telling people this, it's like, I think he's purging the teacher. So there's really nothing Jed got wrong. I think they are the perfect books for somebody on this journey that wants to just go cut through all the bull crap and just kind of like go right to it. So yeah, I hope this video was helpful, and I trust that if you're watching it, the few people that are watching this might get something out of it. So if you're feeling in that place of loneliness or something's going on, know that you aren't alone. And there's also nothing wrong with the loneliness. Being in that state of presence can be quite beautiful. And if you desire to create connection, I have found that there are ways. Like when Aja and I have communications, because we have this base understanding of the no self, we're filtering everything through that. So we can actually create connection through that. I don't ever have to hold her as into like, oh, this is who you are and this is who you need to be for me. It's like, you're constantly changing. I'm constantly changing. How can we find connection within that space? I'm never thinking you need to be something so that I can have something. I take full no self responsibility of my own creation and the way I'm showing up. So if I do something that's out of alignment, I don't have to defend myself because I don't have a self. I can show up and say, oh, I did that thing and let's actually talk about it. That's not me. That's not what I desire to be or to create, but I did. So I can take responsibility. I can step into that space and say, you know what? Like, let's change that. Let's shift that. Let's talk through what actually makes sense. And it creates this beautiful container for a relationship. That's why we've never, and I can do a whole nother video about relationships, but and we've had moments and little tips and things, but we've never had an all-out fight because there's who would be fighting. You see what I'm saying? There's no us to be fighting. So if there's a moment of discord, we can both pause and be like, wait a second, your character's saying this and this is why, my character's saying this and this is why. Neither is true. So what do we really desire? Oh, we desire connection. Let's find a way to create that connection. And because we've gone through this process of the destruction of the false, it makes it so much easier to create that connection, because I'm not holding her to something and she's not holding me to some ideal either. We're just existing and we're spending our time together and enjoying that. So yeah, thank you for watching this video. I've got plenty of others on my channel. I do, if you are interested in like any kind of guidance and stuff, shoot me an email at youenjoylifemusic@gmail.com, whether you just want to share what you're feeling or you actually want to work together or come to a retreat. You can check out the link below as well. Our retreats, we call them sacred rest, and I'd say it's the closest thing to being in a space of where you can experience this process. The retreats aren't to try to heal you or fix you or change you, or it's just like, come live with us and see what it's like to actually live in this state of presence, to see what it's like to allow yourself to go through the destruction of the false, and just have other people that have been there before that can give you some guidance and remind you that you're not insane. So anyhow, chat soon.